Good morning, everybody. My name is Lauren Boone. This is NOI Education Services. Welcome back to our channel. And today we are going to be talking about what your data is telling the regulator and why that is important. Now, we are coming up to the time of the year where we are finalizing data. If you are working with a state funding body, you are likely going to be finalizing that by the end of this month. And if you are just providing to NCDER via AVETMISS, then you're going to be doing that at the end of February. You should be starting to go through that data now. And guys, if you're only reporting annually, I do suggest you start to look at a process where you are going to be moving to reporting on a quarterly basis. The new standards do come into effect as of the 1st of the 7th, and they will say that you have to report in line with the regulator requirements. That means the regulator does have the option to update it from annually to quarterly, either for individual RTOs or for the sector as a whole. And I think that that's going to be where we're going to see that space going. Now, you guys might be asking, it's just an AVETMISS data submission. Why is it important? However, with the advent of and the use of AI and big data reviews happening more frequently, it's really actually important for you to understand what your RTO is actually telling the regulator when they're submitting data. And we quite often go in and work with RTOs, and they're often surprised when we start to dig into data, what that data is actually telling us. So if you haven't watched our operation series, we did do a big dive on data. And so if you haven't, I would suggest that you go back and look at that. But some of the things that you're telling your the regulator in your AVETMISS data is your basic numbers. So has your number jumped substantially? Has it dropped substantially from year on year? What is your rationale for that? If you've gone from having, 10 students to having 1,000 students, what's your rationale for that? Have you updated all of your resources in line with that? That might be one of the questions that they might be thinking based on seeing a giant jump in numbers. They're also going to be telling things like the duration, okay? So, and when I say basic numbers, I mean basic numbers like your total numbers across your RTO, but also where those numbers are going. And so that might be that you've made a major change from fee-for-service to government funding. It might be that you've made a change from government funding to international students or vice versa. It might be that you've gone from doing full qualifications to, doing a lot more individual units. It could also be that you've moved into a high-risk area. Okay, so understanding what your numbers are and what those numbers are telling the regulator is important so that you can explain that in line with your business plan and your risk your risk assessment and things like that. Also, under the RTO standards, ASPA does have a calculator. So in terms of like what the numbers are, that kind of has an impact on how many validations and things like that you should be doing. Validation is an area where very few RTOs stay up to date. So it is really important that you take into account what your numbers are. We certainly recommend that when you're planning your validations, you should actually be looking at your numbers, and you should be looking at, what was the greatest number of, what units had the greatest number of assessments, what was the competent versus not competent outcomes and things like that. They're also going to be looking at duration. That's duration of qualifications and duration of units of competency. So when we've gone in and done reviews, this has been part of, accelerate migrations, or it's just been part of like a business operations review. We found that we've got, units that have been reported where they actually started, where they were actually finished before they started, where qualifications are being deemed in as little as 2-3 days, where units of competency, on the other hand of that, some units are taking over a year to complete. Some units are taking over 3 years on average to complete. Qualifications, on average, look like they're taking, twice what's in their TAS. And primarily that's because, you've got a lot of students that are not being effectively, progressed and managed, and therefore they're not being withdrawn. So you've got large numbers of students just sitting there in qualifications when they're not really active. It will then, of course, be telling you information about your completion rates. So they're looking at that at a unit level and at a qualification level. It is a little bit harder to do over a qualification level, but it's certainly not impossible. They'll be looking at things like your completion rates, obviously keeping in mind with your state funding contracts, The vast majority of state funding contracts actually have KPIs on your completion rates. So that's something to look at as well. They will be looking at your demographics. So again, thinking about like if your demographics have massively switched, whether that's like rural to regional, male to female, younger to older, older to younger, employed to job seeker, all of those sorts of things. It gives the information on the demographics of who you're working with. CRICOS ones, they're going to be looking at onshore versus offshore. And obviously that impacts your risk rating and things like that as well. And finally, all of that tells a little bit of information about your progression. And while under the old RTO standards, if you were a state funding body or if you were dealing with CRICOS, progression has come into part of it. Under the new standards, all students, progression is an issue. Certainly within a lot of fee-for-service, online and short course RTOs, we see that a lot of students are not well managed. They're put into the system, but they're not regularly checked. And when they just continue on, they're not then effectively closed out. So really, really important to actually take a look at your data. As I've said, if you haven't taken a look at the RTO operation series, we make a whole bunch of recommendations on the types of reports and things like that you can pull. If you're an Accelerate user already, by all means, give us a call. We can book in a consultation with you and show you how to set up all of these reports so that you're getting some really good information in hand every month. And that will tell you a lot more about how your business is actually running. The vast majority of RTO CEOs and managers that I speak with, the numbers that they tell me and the numbers that their system tells me are almost always chalk and cheese. So really, really handy to actually make sure that how many students you believe you have and how many active students you actually have are the same thing. If you don't know how to get that number, you can give us a call and we can certainly help you out. Otherwise, guys, you are coming up to the point. Remember, we do have our AVETMISS submissions coming on board. So if you don't have staff actively working on this, if it's not part of your meeting minutes and things like that, should be part of your initial process, thinking about how you're going to attack your AVETMISS this year, looking at what that information says, and making sure that you're going in with clean and accurate data 2025. This has been a nice quick one, but I hope you guys have found it helpful. My name is Lauren Boone, Anawaya Education Services.